gosh. Well, hopefully I'm live now. We're going to get together and we're going to have another live stream about gang stalking, and hopefully it's working. Let me see here. We've got a bit of an issue out here with what's going on. I may have to. This is the second time I've tried to come on here, and let's see here. What's the problem now? Okay. All right. There we are. And it looks like Nicholas Boserman is in here. Sorry about that, guys. Having a little bit of technical difficulties, and Nick can hear me. Okay, we're good. Sorry about that. I don't know what the hell was going on. My phone has been kind of glitchy today, so whatever. But no, we're gonna look at some things, and of course, as I've always illustrated and emphasized, gang stalking. There's never a shortage of material ever. And when it comes to the ordeal that targeted individuals are dealing with, and all the techniques that are coming at them and that are being used to destabilize people, which is really part of the TI experience. Okay, and I've mentioned before, there's people out there that are being experimented on. They're being attacked. They're being watched, but they don't know it. Okay, and part of the game that the targeted individual is playing is the fact that they are aware. Okay, they are fully aware that they're being hunted down. It's done purposefully. Okay, but it is there to accomplish a lot of things. Okay, and I've talked about the different ways that gang stalking can manifest, and there's different reasons for it. Hypothetically, you have to speculate exactly what those are, and I've always emphasized the spiritual foundation of gang stalking. But sometimes it really does go into experimentation and so on and so forth. And that's part of it. Of course, you have different stages that lead up to that. And I've talked about the fact that this is illegal and it has to be obfuscated. Okay. And in order to do that, certain things have to be accomplished. And the destabilization of targets, along with other techniques, is crucial, because, of course, you can't have somebody with a lot of resources and credibility. Okay. It's a different game for those people. It really is. And this time I'm going to go into the comments early and see who's out there. Probably should wait. Of course, I never schedule these live streams because of the obvious harassment that I've received, not only in my personal life but on the channel. And it's just, I don't want to make it easy. I don't want to make it easy, and I don't like to lock myself into something. And I've talked about that before too, even just for targeted individuals, as far as some of the protocols that they follow. A lot of times perps will do that. They will try to control your calendar, or you will be encircled and infiltrated. And, they'll try and do that, and they will try to set up targets. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And there's a lot of things that can go into it. And if they know your schedule and they know you have important things to take care of, well, that just opens up a lot of opportunities, not only just to provoke you emotionally, but they can covertly drug you, or they can keep you awake if you've got like an important appointment or something. I've seen that kind of technique used, and it all just comes out of the woodwork, right? And then, of course, the accusations and the gaslighting are pretty heavy at that point. We're going to go into the comments here. And let's see here. Obviously, Nicholas Boserman. Bora Bora, great. Okay. And that's it so far. Okay, well, let's see if you guys have anything. Okay. Okay, well, it looks like Bora Bora and Nicholas Boserman are talking. And Nicholas Boserman says that I expand his vocabulary. Really? I don't know. You seem a lot smarter than I am. But I must have said something. Okay. I don't know. Destabilization. That's right up there. And I don't know. You don't need a thesaurus for that. But anyway, okay. Well, we only got a couple people out there. It's fine. Most of the views are later, and when it comes to the puppet masters, I've talked about that before. When you get into the perps, you have ultimately a spiritual foundation that goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. If you're one of those people that gets into the secret societies or the hierarchy that's in the government with the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Rosicrucians, the Committee of 300, the Council of 33 High Freemasonry, and then you get into the higher ups as far as the West is concerned, and that's the 13 families that have a lot of clout and everything, and some of them do have that royal lineage that goes back to Egypt. Believe it or not, not all of them do though. And then you have like the Bilderbergers; they're kind of married in. There's a lot of especially when you get into the council, or excuse me, the Committee of 300. You don't have a lot of purebloods, but you do have people with a lot of money. And I've mentioned those guys before. As far as the Western families are concerned, Astor, Bundy, Collin, DuPont, Freeman, Kennedy, Lee, Onassis, Rockefeller, Russell, Van Dyne, Merovingian, and Rothschild and Sinclair. And Rothschild, of course, is kind of a throw in there. But when you get into the royals, that's a little bit different. And there's a lot of mythos around that stuff when you get into some of the myths out there as far as inbreeding and different things like that. And there's a little different explanation for some of that stuff. It gets pretty weird, but a lot of targets will deal with the blood type scenario. They will deal with different things that have to do with lineages and all that stuff. Bloodline activity, different religious stuff. A lot of targets will speculate that because they'll speculate that they're part of a ritual or that they fulfill some type of scapegoat and some type of ritual thing. Not all Satanists, that practice the same way, and it gets a little more covert when you get into, like Aleister Crowley, for example. He claimed to do human sacrifice, but I'm going to spare you the details on that. Sometimes it's different than what people think. It can have to do with different things like masturbation or other activities, or other things that like donated. I don't know. It really gets weird when you get into that. But the point is when you get into the secret societies and when you get into what's really happening, a lot of Masons will talk about the great architect, the monad or whatever, and other, types of religions that just have like a God figure. And that's dangerous. Anytime you're excluding Christ out of the scenario, of course, that's the true definition of Antichrist. Okay, a lot of people, they have a type of presupposition when it comes to the Antichrist, and they believe he's going to be that guy that comes out of Europe, like Hollywood, like Damien or whatever, and he wants everybody to take a microchip, and it's all. I don't believe that. You can believe whatever you want on that. I believe he's going to be a Muslim, and I believe that his main focus is going to be cosmic geography, and the Book of Daniel describes him very vividly. As he's not going to regard the God of his fathers because he comes out of the lineage of Ishmael and Esau. He is not going to regard the desire of women, which is not celibacy or homosexuality. That has to do with the desire of Hebrew women. Of course, you have to look through the Hebrew lens, in that he is not going to regard the Messiah. And when I've already mentioned that when you get into the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, you got a lot of different stuff going on that most people do not know about. And that has to do with the order of Zadok and the Essenes, the original solar calendar where all the feast days and everything lined up perfectly. They got into a fight with the Pharisees, who Jesus called the synagogue of Satan, right? That their father was the devil. Well, that wasn't just because they were trying to murder him with the law and they were stubborn and dealing with judicial hardening, but they had covered up the fact that the Messiah, as I said, when you're describing the Antichrist or the Antichrist spirit, that he was just going to be some guy that fights a war and helps the Jewish people out, not the truth that the Essenes knew about. They were technically like the first Christians, and that the Messiah was going to be God incarnate, and that he was going to die and pay for the sins of the world. Okay, so that's something that a lot of people don't know. But getting into the description of the Antichrist, it's important to know that, of course, he's going to come out of the lineage of Ishmael and Esau. I've talked about the sixes before, where you have, it's not like 666. A lot of people get into the mark of the beast and they, it's not that, it's something else. And well, okay, but you have to remember that the Bible confirms itself. And when it calls for a mind of wisdom to calculate the number of the beast, of course, where's the only other place in the Bible that has 666? Well, that has to do with Solomon, who committed spiritual adultery, right? In Deuteronomy, he was not supposed to go back to Egypt, multiply wives, multiply silver and gold, or make a covenant with the nations. So the spiritual adultery is a very important part. And you have to know that all these data points fit together when it comes to the Antichrist. And when you get into the gold that Solomon was paid, of course, that was 666 talents of gold, right? And the Queen of the South, right, which has to do with Egypt, is the one that arranged that whole thing. And of course, Solomon, he wasn't supposed to do that, and he ended up making child sacrifice temples to Molech, I do believe, ended very badly. But the reference to that number of the beast, of course, it's going to be a number. Okay, I'm not denying that, and the mark is going to be an actual mark. But you have to understand the data points, and you have to put it together, and you have to understand the cosmic geography that is going on. Okay, and that, of course, involves the Holy Land over there, and more specifically, the Mount of Assembly, which is the true meaning of Armageddon. They have a breathing mark in the Greek language instead of an H sound, which takes Harmageddon into Harmoge, which is the Mount of Assembly, the battle of gods and men. And you have to understand that, for example, on October 7th, when we had that the big attack on Israel, after that, the Muslims had put out a call to flood Jerusalem. So there's going to be a huge flood concerning that. We have over 2 billion Muslims strong. And when you get into the heads of the dragon, you start out with ancient Egypt. Like I said, when you get into this hierarchy of the puppet masters and what you're looking at as far as the system of the world, and that is the two kingdoms before the statue of Nebuchadnezzar that is referenced from Babylon down to the feet of iron and clay, which is a two-part kingdom. So in the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, you have Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, then the Ottoman Empire, which is a two-part empire because, of course, we know in 1923 the Ottoman Empire was taken down, and then it is reviving now. Okay, so the eighth is going to come out of the seventh. One of the heads had a deadly wound, and the final head, of course, of this seven-headed contingency is the caliphate, in my opinion. And it started out with ancient Egypt and then moved to Assyria, and then, of course, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then the Ottoman Empire, which, of course, is a two-part thing. And then the 10 horns, 10 kings, 10 toes is the 10 nation or the 10 kings coalition that give themselves over to that individual who's going to be, in that final 7-year period, who's probably on the scene now, which I've talked about the fact that when you get into the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, we are in the last 49 years before the 1,000-year reign. And there were 3 2,000-year periods broken up into 500-year segments for each. And now we are moving towards the final 1,000 years, which I've talked about before, concerning the hope that targeted individuals have. Lawsuits would be great. Getting evidence would be great. Prosecuting some of these bastards who are doing this stuff would be fun and awesome. But ultimately, there's going to be total justice when Jesus returns. And that's something that it's not something you're hoping for. And it's something it's important. Now, getting back into the perps and the hierarchy, I kind of went off on that Antichrist thing there for a while. We also have things in the government. We have the CIA, the FBI. You got MK Ultra, you got COINTELPRO, you got organized stalking, cyber, warfare, multi-domain warfare. You even have secret armies and death squads. You got all kinds of weird stuff going on. Civilian and military cyber stalkers. You have role players. You have all kinds of weird things as far as the domestic terrorism and the surveillance is going for the government, the CIA, the NSA, NATO, the DoD, the DHS, the FBI. You also have elements of the occult that I've referenced before, and is mixed in with the secret societies. And like I said at the beginning of the show, when you get into this hierarchy and you get into looking at the puppet masters, ultimately their god is Lucifer, is Satan. When you get into the light or the hidden knowledge, the secret wisdom that comes out of all these things, which go back again to ancient Egypt, right? And I've mentioned the Rosicrucians and stuff like that before, but getting back to what I said about individuals who are experiencing some of this stuff, and people have talked about being a sacrifice or a scapegoat or whatever, because the target individual is put into the place of a scapegoat, but rather than human sacrifice, right, where you're just going to take somebody out and kill them, or do something in the graveyard or whatever. They make it sound ridiculous. It's feasible, even though I'm speculating, and I've seen a lot of this weird stuff, especially when you get into different Masonic types of pseudo cults and fraternities and stuff like that. Is that they will make oaths and pacts, and they will do all these different things, but ultimately this stuff is demonic. Okay. And like I said, the occult and Freemasonry, or, all these things, you can't, when you get into the higher levels of that stuff, you can't tell it apart. But for kids who were targeted individuals, growing up, and some of the things that I experienced, especially when you get into the occult, or you get into the secret societies or these fraternities and all that stuff, which they're all connected. And it's really creepy when you look at it, is that, the menticide and the gaslighting and then the harassment that a lot of targets will experience goes back to childhood, and they will experience this stuff in a way where they are slowly, being put in that place of the scapegoat. So rather than, to take, their child out, or kill it, or kill a baby or something like that, they will literally just gaslight the child and set them up for menticide and moral corruption and moral breakdown. And it's almost a type of sacrifice, a pact with the devil, if you will, the scapegoat of the family. And it's kind of creepy. I don't necessarily want to go into it into too many levels because it hits home with some of you out there. I don't want to trigger anybody, but it's true. And when you look at what's happening, even for people who are not involved in the secret societies that are in these fraternities or in these occult groups that do this stuff, they're still spiritually manipulated. They are still demonically controlled. There's infiltration of a lot of different things, even if it's just a type of philosophy that is, like I mentioned earlier, an Antichrist type, where they, like in the Freemasons, they hold to the architect or whatever. Jesus isn't really a big deal, and that's not a coincidence. So when you get into a lot of people that get into a cult, well, I think we should just worship God and Jesus. Well, no, Jesus is the central axiom of everything involved in Christianity, like I mentioned with the Essenes, or with the true knowledge that God was going to come, the scriptures that mix the glory of God with a human being. And even when you get into John 6, you have a type of Trinitarian discussion when Jesus said, "You don't know who I am. You were not taught of God and the prophets." And he emphasizes that whole thing that he is from the Father, and so on and so forth. And the Jews always had the two-part or the two powers in their mind frame or conceptual framework, in the sense that the Spirit of the Lord would depart and some would still be there talking to them. So they knew these things. Okay. And Jesus was trying to tell them who he was, in the sense that he was being fair, fulfilling prophecy. And of course, they were under judicial hardening. And since they were not taught of God and of the prophets, they did not know who he was. Now we're dealing with more of a level playing field concerning that, as far as the Jews, the Gentiles. This is the age of grace. And anybody who believes in Christ and is someone who submits to that, and embraces the gospel and draws near to God, of course, is going to be in Christ. And that's pretty much a done deal. But like I said, when you get into these pseudo Christian cults, or you get into the secret societies, or you get into all these other things, they try to avoid that. Okay. And they have their philosophy. It's a type of destiny philosophy that comes from that hidden knowledge and secret wisdom. And they believe literally in the higher up levels that they have a rendezvous with destiny to fight the God, or the oppressive God of Israel. Right. And it's really creepy. So my whole point in going through that is that the hierarchy, the higher ups and the puppet master, the system, they are worshiping the devil. Okay, they worship Satan. Satan is their god. They don't try to hide it when you get into the higher levels. Like I said, lower level Freemasons, they don't really know that stuff. They're not aware of those things. Rosicrucianism tries to steer away from that stuff. They go into the architect and all that. I do believe I'm right about that, but it's creepy when they get into the prophetic, hidden knowledge, and secret wisdom, and all that stuff that I've talked about before. Especially when targets are getting things that are clairvoyant, and have to do with foreknowledge and that stuff. That's all part of the secret knowledge and hidden wisdom. Of course, that has bewitched the people in the secret societies, the occult, because it's very convincing, and I've dealt with it firsthand. A lot of people online will talk about the false prophets of the charismatic movement or the Pentecostals, and what they said never came to pass, so they can't be prophets. Well, I don't believe there's prophets now anyway. I think that there's people with words of knowledge and stuff. That's different. But as far as a legitimate prophet, I think they're gone. I think the apostles, in the sense that Paul said he was the last of them, and that was about 20 years after, and that there was going to be wolves that creep in and introduce destructive heresies, not sparing the flock, and so on and so forth, is that they had power to cast down the false teachers and stuff like that. Now, well, false teachers are running everywhere. They have ministries that last for a long time. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars. They have, decades full of prosperity, and God just figured out a way to use the enemy so he gets glory. He's not worried about that. He's not intimidated. And at the end of the day, like I said, there's a level playing field, and everybody has a responsibility, since the canon has been presented to us, to seek out, mine out the truth, and worship God, the Spirit, and in truth. Right. So but when you get into the secret societies and you get into the hierarchy of these puppets and the puppet masters, you were dealing first and foremost with the spiritual dimension and the hierarchy of the principalities and powers going back after the nations were divided up after the Tower of Babel. Of course, that came out of the Genesis 6 account when you had the copulation of men and angels together. And then now you have all those the things that I referenced earlier as far as the seven heads. Ancient Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, the Ottoman Empire. And those are the kingdoms and the major facets concerning the cosmic geography that I've talked about before. And then you move into the government. You got the obvious perps there: NATO, DOD, FBI, DHS, CIA, NSA. You got the occult, and then you have things involved in religion, things, but really the emphasis is that you're dealing with people who are being manipulated, and either they're indoctrinated or heavily oppressed or possibly even possessed demonically. Okay. So that goes into the puppet master aspect of it. But when you get into the destabilization of targeted individuals, I mentioned earlier in the video that there's people out there that don't have any idea that they're being experimented on or watched. There's cameras in their house. They're dealing with different types of frequencies that are manipulating their moods. All these different things are going on, possibly implants, other different types of experimentation happening to people. They're unaware of what is going on, but for targeted individuals, they know what is happening, and they are dealing with that obvious harassment. But of course, there are things that happen first. Okay, like I said, when you get into the experimentation aspect of what targeted individuals are dealing with, that's illegal activity. It must be obfuscated. It must be hidden. It must be surrounded by plausible deniability. So you have the obvious surveillance. You have the intel. You have people being profiled. They're being set up. They're dealing with, a type of indoctrination and infiltration. They are being encircled and surrounded. They're being set up. And I mentioned earlier that, even when you get into a lot of the targeted individuals out there who speculate they've been, a TI ever since they were a little kid, they could be dealing with something like that. Okay. And so I mentioned some of the foreplay that targeted individuals deal with, where, they hear comments or they get street theater, or directed conversations when they're kids that set up this framework. Right. And then, of course, as they get older, they're kind of prepped for that whole thing. And then it lights off like, most target individuals, they experience that reality flip, and their world is turned upside down, and they are dealing with the shock and awe Okay, they're dealing with very obvious harassment. It's there's no speculation needed, and of course the strange, the funny part about it is that for me anyway, and for a lot of targets that I've talked to, they don't take it seriously. You're getting surrounded. You're dealing with this weird stuff. You're getting little comments here and there. It might even be decades before all this stuff happens. It starts to mount up. It starts to form that crescendo effect. You don't know what's going on, but you feel like you're being encircled. There's attacks coming from different geographical locations, maybe in your social circle, maybe even in your family, maybe your workplace, and then it just explodes. And targets are dealing with personal information, and of course, they usually leave some of that real intense stuff for that shock and awe period where they're breaking into your house, or drugging you, or moving stuff around, or attacking your personal property, or whatever. Or you're dealing with real hostile, directed conversations. It'll move from just personal information into those different themes that I've talked about before. We're going to give you cancer. We're going to poison you. We're going to kill you. We heard about you. Yeah, you move into that smear campaign. So technically, you are dealing with different stages of this whole thing, right? The surveillance and the setup. That's usually stage one. Stage two, you're dealing with, well, I guess stage two would be more of a setup. Stage three would be then encirclement, and then you deal with infiltration. You move into the indoctrination, then you move into the gaslighting, and then it just gets evil, right? And then the target is dealing with a smear campaign. They might be blackballed at that point, of course, because they have to isolate the target. And then you move into different things that targets talk about with energy weapon attacks, experimentation, or the psychic vampires. They're feeding on you, and then they have the opportunity to gaslight after they've discredited you. And then it's just depending on what happens to the target, they can destroy, neutralize, or experiment, along with, whatever they want to do, depending on who it is that you're dealing with. I'm going to move back into the comments and see who's out there. Of course, we have Bora Bora and Nicholas Bosmer with Spirit, Faith, and Times. Welcome to the live stream. And let's see here. Where dolls dance. Dollhouse, welcome to the live stream. And it looks like my comments kind of froze up there for a minute. My phone's been glitching out a little bit, guys. And I apologize for that. I'm going to see what kind of comments you guys have out there. Okay. Okay, you guys are still hashing out last night's conversation. And let's see here. I'm not sure if some of these comments are for me. Nicholas Bosmerman says the end of The Omen is super creepy, where that kid grins. Yeah, that's that's typical for the Reformation era eschatology for the Antichrist. And like I said, you get into very specific definitions when you get into the Bible and the book of Revelations. He's not going to regard the God of his fathers. He's not going to regard the desire of women. He's not going to believe in the Christ. And he's going to honor the God of forces, the God of fortresses, which in my opinion is Allah. Okay. And like I said, you can see the cosmic geography that is involved when you look at a map, for example, of ancient Egypt or Assyria or Babylon or Media, Persia, or Greece, Rome, the Ottoman Empire. All that stuff is surrounded around the Holy Land, and you're dealing with that Middle East area. And of course, a lot of people believe it's going to be Rome, which in Revelations it talks about, the fact that it now is not, and it is yet to come. And that was given to John the Revelator during what? During the Roman Empire. So that's pretty contradictive there. Okay. So anyway, you have an issue there. But, the other issue is the prophecies of Daniel, which I've talked about before, when you're dealing with the, just the Babylonian exile and the prophecies and the desolations. And you have the word coming to Jeremiah at 605. And then you have the temple being destroyed at 586. And then you have the sacrifice being, taken away or ceasing at 583. And then you have the decree coming out in late 538 for them to leave. And then you also have them returning back into the Holy Land in 536, which is exactly 70 years right? And so that's important. A lot of people say, well, it's not 70 years exactly. It is 70 years exactly. 605 to 536 is 70 years. And then, of course, we have, different days, years, conversions that we use for that. Like I said, in 583, the prophecies of Daniel declare when the angel was talking to Daniel when he was disturbed, it says, well, he didn't know what to think about all these things. And so the angel said, in 1290 days after the sacrifice ceases, the abomination of desolation will be set up. And of course, we know about the 483 years or the 173,880 days from the decree of 444 all the way to 32 AD, which lines up with the Dead Sea Scroll calendar to the day. But in the example of the 69 weeks of Daniel, in other words, 490 years of disobedience minus a week is 483. Takes you right to the coming of the Messiah. It's very specific, but you have a days, years conversion there. And, I talked about the different calendars that are used by those different groups, the Pharisees and the Essenes. And so the solar calendar, you have to use that to convert from the lunar calendar, which, of course, the Pharisees moved into that. And they didn't, they have to make up for a lot of different things in that concerning the feast days. And they have to add, I think it's like a leap week or a leap month or something like that. I can't remember right now. But that's a 360-day calendar, right? So if you take, for example, the first 7 is 360 times 7, which is 2,520. And so you multiply that by 0.9857 to get 2,484 years. So if you take the end of the Babylonian exile, which is technically 536, not 538, they had to liquidate their businesses. They had to take a 1,000-mile journey. What do you have? Okay, take that away from 2,484, and you're going to have 1948 exactly. That's not a coincidence. Okay, or when you move into the 1,290 days years, right after the sacrifice is taken away in 583. And so what do? You multiply 1,290 times 0.9857, you get 127, 1.5. Minus 583 takes you to 688. The cosmic geography, which is, standing in the holy place, where a lot of people think that's got to be the temple. We're in the Messianic age. The cosmic geography is clear. What's the holy place? It is the Mount of Assembly, the true meaning of Armageddon, the Mount, the Temple Mount. And what's there? Of course, right there in the midpoint, 688, between, I think it was, anyway, we could argue about those years, but that's roughly the midpoint of when the shrine was being set up. And then, of course, halfway through the 7, which would be 706, like I said, from 536 to 1948, you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque being put up on the wing of the Temple Mount, or the wing of abominations. That's not a coincidence. Does that mean there's not going to be a 7-year period? No, there's going to be a 7-year period at the end of it, but the 7 and all these things they're fulfilled throughout history. Okay, it's like when Jesus was talking to people in Matthew 24, and he talked about people being left and people being taken. That's not talking about a pre-tribulation rapture, because of course we know that he answered his disciples, or the apostles more specifically, when they said, where are they going to be taken to, Jesus? And Jesus said, where the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. Okay, so what happened in 70 AD? Well, they broke into businesses. They came into people's houses. They would take some of them out. They would crucify them outside the city. So the loved ones in the chaos are looking for all their family members, and they knew where they were. Why? Because they could see all the vultures and the eagles and all that stuff circling over the people being crucified outside the city. But he was also talking about the very end, okay, because he references the abomination spoken about by the prophet Daniel, which of course is something that happened, like I said, in 688. But of course, the final fulfillment of that is going to be in the last 7-year period, which there is a very good possibility that we have a double fulfillment, or even a temple built, right, where the son of perdition, or that guy is going to walk in there, possibly even after a treaty or something like that, and he's going to exalt himself. He's not going to declare that he's God of the Jews. He's going to exalt himself above all that is called God. Okay, so that reference is important. Mixing that in with 2 Thessalonians 2:1, where he's going to lift himself up. And a lot of people believe that he's going to, he's going to say he's Jesus, or he's going to say he's the God of Israel. No, because we have very clear indication that the Antichrist is going to blaspheme the God of Israel and speak things against that God, and he's going to honor the God of forces and fortresses with precious stones, gold and silver, coincidentally, which coincides with the image that the Al-Aqsa Mosque that is on the wing of the temple has the Qibla wall, which points exactly geographically towards the image in Mecca. Okay. Is that coincidental? No. And it's not coincidental that they cover it every year with over 6 million precious stones and gold and all that stuff every year. Okay. That's just not a coincidence. But that was kind of a tangent, but a lot of people get confused on that. And even when you get into the 666, which I referenced earlier, you are dealing with a type of gematria that not only uses the Torah, but it uses a lot of different prophecies from the Old Testament. So it's not just numbers. A lot of people do that. Well, you add up this person's name and it's got to be this guy because he's 666. Look, it's more than that. It's talking about, because when you do the math, like I said, it calls for a mind of wisdom to calculate the number of the beast. The wisdom is a reference to the 666 talents of gold that Solomon was paid, and that references the wisdom that he was paid for. Okay, which ultimately ends in spiritual adultery. And he's not going to regard the God of his fathers, meaning that they used to be people who worshiped the God of Israel, right? It's pretty simple. And then, what do you have then? Well, you have the lineage of Ishmael and Esau, so sixes are in there. And then you also have the sixes in the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Ben Joseph, and Ben David. So you have the Christ and you have the Antichrist. There's a lot of things going on in that, and I usually keep that stuff secret, but I thought I'd bring it up tonight. Let me go back into the comments to see what you guys are talking about. Okay. I'm not sure what you're going at here, Bora Bora, but you didn't want me to say it out loud. Huh. But evidently some people are practicing some divination, it looks like, with tarot cards or whatever. You don't want to play that game, period. And that's the same thing that I referenced with the secret societies, okay, and how you mix all this stuff together with witchcraft. It's really like there's people who believe there's white witchcraft and black magic and the good and the bad witch and the good witch, but technically, they're really just being bewitched themselves. And when you get into that stuff, you're dealing with divination, right? And there's even stuff like that happens in different pseudo-Christian cults. I'm not going to mention the names of that, but when you get into some of these supposed manifestations of the Holy Spirit and other things going along with interpreting dreams and orbs of light and all that stuff, God doesn't work that way. Okay, and when you're dealing with stuff like that, like I mentioned earlier, when people are condemned, maybe in the charismatic movement or the Pentecostal movement, and people, what they said didn't come to pass, so they're not prophets. Well, I've seen people prophesy things that did come to pass, and they certainly were not working for God. Okay, they certainly were not, blood-bought, born-again believers. And that stuff is evil, and that's what deceives the secret society. So when you're dealing with tarot cards, or you're dealing with divination, or soothsaying, or any of those things, or Ouija boards, or whatever, you are dealing with that same thing that has bewitched and opened up the people involved in that hierarchy, the puppet masters, and to the spiritual dimension. Okay, which is not something you want to do. All the stuff that happens to targets can fall into those two basic categories. Okay, you're dealing with technology, you're dealing with puppets, you're dealing with government programs, and you're also dealing with stuff that's demonic. Okay, and I've referenced the fact that when technology is involved in the experience of the targeted individual, that could also come from the spiritual dimension. Okay, where'd they get their stuff? Just like the Third Reich, just like the stuff that Hitler was playing around with in the occult, they got a lot of their technology and ideas from the spiritual dimension, and it manifested in physical technology that is being used on people. Okay, so it's people are arguing. They're arguing at that point for no reason, and that's one of the. But anyway, let's go back into the comments. Okay. I'm looking at some stuff here. All right. Well, let's see. Well, let me see. Go Productive 1178 says, but finding a solution is really the goal. And the only way to do that is to basically walk through it and keep moving forward. Otherwise, there's nothing that can really help it. And I'm assuming that's the ordeal of gang stalking. And, the solution is just to keep moving, I think is what you're saying. Because when people get pushed into that solution based mindset, it's pretty dangerous. I talked about that in the last live stream. And it happens to me. It happens to all targets, especially people who are dealing with this stuff for long periods of time. And you get moved into that place of desperation where the sense of injustice mounts up. You're not getting any younger. The opportunities seem to be slipping through your hands. You're looking at everybody living their lives, and you're on the outside looking in, and it sucks. And you get desperate. I was doing that earlier, and I was like, man, I got to snap out of this. Okay, you're paying attention to all the things you're not supposed to be paying attention to, and that's really the trick. Because, and I've talked about the fact that when a targeted individual experiences gang stalking, they get put in that place where they see what's really around them. They see reality. It's raw. It's unadulterated. It's in their face. They see the futility and the fickleness of the people around them, and all the things all these people are running after, and the obvious wicked people out there that are engaged in this stuff that don't seem to be experiencing chastisement. They don't, seem to be experiencing any negative effects, but that's proof. It's proof that all those things are not necessarily blessings from God, and that the disinformation that is coming at the target individual to get them to internalize all this stuff and to feel like they deserve it, to feel like God hates them, to feel like they're cursed, to feel like they're missing out, to feel like they're second-class citizens. It's got to be false, right? Look at who's doing this stuff. They're breaking the law. They're breaking all the laws of the universe. They're evil. They're engaged in petty, ridiculous, murderous activity, and yet they don't seem to be having any negative effects. And it makes the things that you're going through valid in the sense that if you're not on the inside of that, you're not part of that. Well, then the reason you're being persecuted has nothing to do with God or his, I don't know, his disposition towards you, or anything that has to do with anything legal or righteous or anything else. It's based upon the kingdom of Satan. It's based upon the tyranny of the world, the flesh, and the devil. And all these things become very clear as you move through this landscape as a targeted individual. We'll go back into the comments here. Yeah, Nicholas Bosman says, while you battle them and play their game, your life crumbles. And that's one of their main tactics. It is. Death by 1,000 cuts, lateral comparisons, a sense of injustice mounts. You become demoralized, and you move into that place where it's easy to attack the target because they anticipate it happening more and more as they go through this landscape. And I've talked about the disposition and the mental framework of just a human being in general. Okay. If things are going, it's just like the perps. They assume that because they're not experiencing negative effects, that either whatever is in control of this world is not against them, or that they're immune, or that there isn't anything that's ever going to call them out. They're never going to have to deal with this, and they're just going to bury you, and you're going to fade out into nothing, and they're going to get away with it. But that's not true. Okay. But the point is they are basing that conclusion upon external stimuli or circumstantial stimuli that is reinforcing that illegal behavior and that hardness of their heart, which eventually is going to come and get them. Okay. It's going to be bad, right? There's going to be a harvest, and they've got it all out there. They're watering it. They're planting seeds everywhere, and it's going to be, it's going to be really bad. Okay. But, when you get into just the psychological framework of a human being, that circumstantial stimuli is something that we look at and deal with. And for the targeted individual, it has to be ignored, especially if you're a believer targeted individual and you're dealing with the tyranny of the world, the flesh, and the devil. Okay? Because what's going to happen, you're going to get persecuted. You're going to feel like you're being left out. You're going to see other people who are going to be lifted up in false doctrines and other things that seem to be getting blessed. That this stuff is obviously not biblical, but it's there to confuse people. What do you really want? What do you really believe? It's a test of faith, right? But you have to see it for what it is and know that that circumstantial stimuli is going to be different. So rather than looking at people who are blessed and saying, "Well, you're blessed of God." Well, who's the God of this world right now? Well, it's not Jesus, right? There's the tyranny of the kingdom of Satan right now. So it's completely flipped around, and you have that. And sometimes targets will be hacked. Sometimes they'll be persecuted in church. They'll experience gangstalking in a lot of different areas. And if you believe the lie, right, like they do, with that circumstantial stimuli, you can come to the conclusion and experience that gaslighting that a lot of targeted individuals go through, and they believe they've been cursed by God, or they believe they deserve this stuff, or that they did something wrong, or the powers that be have the right to do this stuff. And they don't. And if they have some problem in their life that gets taken out of context, like a substance abuse problem or other things, maybe something in their past or whatever, they will buy into that. This is why I hate you. This is why we're doing this to you. And this is why you deserve it. And so on and so forth. Or we're just trying to help you, or whatever kind of gaslighting campaign is involved in that. But it's circumstantial stimuli. And we'll use the example of a computer code and ones and zeros. Okay, so if you were a targeted individual that's a believer, right? You could start out dealing with something, and I talked about the honey and the vinegar. You get a lot more flies with honey than you do vinegar, right? So you have the 0 representing something that's positive, and the 1 representing something that's negative. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, and you have more positive than you do negative. And the person is going to come to a conclusion based on that stimuli. If you switch that up slowly, right, and you start introducing more ones along with disinformation and lies, and it's going to be hostile, it's going to be negative. The ones always are. 1 1 1 1 0 0 0 1 0 1 0 1 1 1 1 1 1, and you move into more ones, then that proposition becomes more believable because of the circumstantial stimuli the target is dealing with, and that's the foundation of gaslighting. Okay, and they'll do that. Even people who are not targeted individuals, but the kingdom of darkness will do that with Christians. Okay. Oh, God doesn't really love you. Oh, you must change it. He found you're not worthy, or whatever, or you screwed up, or you lost your salvation, or something else. 1 1 1 1 1 0 1 0 1 1 1 1 1 1 0 1 0 1 1 1 1, and it started out with 0 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 1 0 1, and it moves into that slowly, and it just warps the mind of the person who is subjected to it. Okay, and that's incremental gaslighting. It's very subtle, and it's very tricky, and it can happen over decades or years. Okay, and what's the trick? Okay, to have the mental proposition. I've talked about the fact that targets deal with environmental tyranny. That would be part of it, and it moves them into believing things that are either not true about themselves or about the world around them. That's one of the criteria used for condemnation concerning the kingdom of darkness. Okay, why? Because it's based on faith and truth. Okay. And I've talked about the fact that, a lot of people are lifted up as teachers. Some of the most ridiculous, charlatan, fake, false teachers are the most popular, right? I mentioned why before. And, some of that loosing and binding that the apostles did is not around anymore. And they are allowed to prosper. And God is just testing people, right? But, so you can literally be someone who is faithful to the Bible and study all that stuff, and you might get pushed to the side, right? And it's for a reason. People need to mine out the truth. God wants to keep a level playing field. He wants to keep this fair. And what is the criteria is the same for salvation as it is for condemnation, right? You believe a lie. You believe something is not true. You're under propositional tyranny, or your faith starts to go down because of the 1 1 1 1 0 1 0 1 1 1, and you start to lose your faith because you're paying attention to the propositional tyranny, and you're not drawing near to God. And Satan will do that and try and draw you away, right? But the point is that if you know the truth and you do these other things, it's based on faith and truth. but the condemnation criteria is the same. So with a false teacher, what are they doing? Well, they're giving out a bunch of propositional, the tyrannical BS, right? You have to know the difference and move away from that. That's the criteria. Right. What about your faith? It's the same thing. You worship God, the Spirit of Truth. You see a lot of people in those pseudo-Christian, organizations or whatever. They're all, oh, we're going to call down the Spirit of God. We're going to have all these worship things, and they're trying to fast and get God to do all this genie stuff for them or whatever. And it's ridiculous. They don't have any of the good teachings, expository teachings, or anything that has to do with any sustenance in the Word of God. They're just trying to do all these weird things so they can have an emotional feeling, right? It's like a modern day Tower of Babel, okay? So the criteria is the same in that sense. Like I said, when it comes to target individuals that are believers, you're going to be dealing with a hyper exaggerated, methodology concerning that type of environmental tyranny using circumstantial stimuli. I'm going to move back into the comments. Okay. Okay. FNE says, welcome to the live stream, by the way. Dr. De Facto, do you have any suggestions for people who have to share the workplace with possible criminals and gang members? Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and targets deal with that all the time. Possible criminals and gang members. That's funny. I know you're serious, but when it comes to the world that we live in, as far as the target individual, especially people who are dealing with higher forms of harassment, you're going to be dealing with the gang stalking and criminals, no matter where you go. That's just the way it is, and they'll flip up that stimuli all the time. But advice, yeah, absolutely. You don't want to react. You don't want to pay attention to anything they're doing. You want to live above reproach, and you want to create boundaries around yourself so that if they come in there, whatever it is, they like when I talked about earlier, your schedule is yours. Don't let people try to monopolize you or call you out, get you into conversations where they get you talking and answering their questions. That's a CIA technique, right? You follow it up. You even put in the awkward silence to try and get the person to talk. Okay, there's a lot of techniques involved in that kind of thing. You don't buy into that. You don't need to tell anybody anything. And I've talked about the fact that if somebody is asking you questions that are none of their business, it's okay to lie. That's my policy. You don't need to know those things. And as far as my schedule, I'm real busy. And you know what? It may or may not happen. That's the same way when I don't schedule the live streams. I like to keep everything open. And a lot of times targets will be, boxed in a place where people are doing that. They'll either try to, get them talking or, call them out or control them in a certain way or control their calendar or try to learn their schedule or, put them in a box so they can harass them and manipulate them. You don't want that to happen. You want to create boundaries around yourself of protection, not only in ways like that, but as far as the workplace is concerned, I've talked about heavy harassment. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Like I said, you want to live above reproach, but you want these people to have to cross your boundary. Okay. So, it's like, when you're getting, baited by the perps to that place where they want to manufacture justification to attack you. Right. And they'll, it's like the people in the comments, oh, I don't know, you're Dr. DeFake, or I disagree with you, and this and that. And they'll set you up or they'll say something. And it's like, well, if you say anything, then, you have to know that they're probably working with other perps that are pretending like they're target individuals. They may even have your personal information at this point. And what will happen? They'll try to escalate it and then dox you or play other games with you or attack your channel or make videos about you or spread false information about you. That's just Gangstalking 101. Okay. Don't buy into the bait. That's first. And instead of, having them draw you across that little line in the sand that they've drawn that's there, even though they've already crossed it, because there's no logic when you're dealing with a perp. Don't expect logic, justice, or even reasonability when you're dealing with these people, because you're not going to find it. That's another way that's another thing, I guess, that you want to put in your protocols. You can't even expect that from these people at all. Okay. but you want them to cross, your boundaries, and they're the ones that have to do the explaining then, right? And I've talked about different positions and different types of jobs, and the workplace harassment can become very intense for targeted individuals to the place where you have to do gig work or whatever. That's what I'm doing. I have worked at I don't know, establishments and done, but I did deal with it. But like I said, you have to live in a way where they cannot, because they want to accuse you. And a lot of the problems that come out of being a targeted individual are just the manufactured sequelae that comes along with what you're dealing with as a targeted individual, where you're dealing with energy weapons or V2K or, demonic stuff, or people, doing noise campaigns in your neighborhood, or harassing you, or character assassination, or constant, brighting, or people harassing you in traffic, or stalling tactics, or, the death of 1,000 cuts has its effect, and the targeted individual might have a hard time concentrating, or you might be experiencing things in your personal life that are making it hard for you to perform, and they'll try to draw you into that little nightmare where they can accuse you or whatever, and you have to try to manage that stuff and realize that you're not going to judge yourself according to what other people know or don't know, because there are a lot of people around you that have no idea what you're dealing with. They know. Okay, so they're going to try and rally you up, and they're going to try to maximize on that emotional currency that is already there. One of the things that targeted individuals deal with is that type of, I don't know, it's like it's a medium that is created where they will try to get that reciprocity. First they trigger you, and they want to see how long you keep going with it. And I've talked about that before. There's a time limit. You have to see and recognize when you're being triggered as a target. Okay, you're dealing with a lot. You're dealing with noise campaigns, workplace harassment, all these things. People are breaking into your house. They're invading your space in all kinds of different ways. They're following you around. They're harassing you. You got the ear gate. You're within earshot of them. You can see what's happening. All these things are going on, and it's going to take its toll. Okay, but that's the point. They want you in that place where you're thinking about gang stalking, trying to figure it out. You're pushed into that solution-based mindset. You're very emotional. You're being triggered. You're regurgitating this stuff round and round in your mind. You're marinating in it. You become confused. You become dysfunctional. You become futile, and they get you into that place, and then they come and or they try to harass you at work, or whatever they're going to do, or they get you into that place where they want to provoke you. And it's like the narcissist who just slowly chips away at someone's sanity, and it just harasses somebody, with that type of psychological torture, and then, indoctrinates people, then, gets them in a crowd of those people, and then pushes, them with the last final straw, and they just, they blame. The people are like, whoa, what's wrong with you? Boy, you're really overreacting. And of course, the accusations and all that stuff come. It's the same strategy with targeted individuals. Don't let them do it. Don't let them do it. They want to do that. So you have to create boundaries for yourself. And I've talked about different positions at the job where, you want to try and limit the amount of contact and accessibility that people have to you. And if possible, you want to stay busy, right? And, but other than that, as a targeted individual, you're going to be dealing with workplace harassment, and you cannot give up. That's the other thing. If a target's out there, I keep, looking for that place where people aren't going to harass me. They're going to be waiting for you wherever you go. Okay. If you're one of those targets that's dealing with higher forms of harassment, you're not going to be getting away. Okay. You're going to go from job to job, and you're just going to keep quitting your job. Oh, they started being mean to me. Of course they're going to. And if you give up, if you give in, if you show that type of emotional weakness, or you just feel like you're exhausted, I understand. But at the same time, they will gain respect for you when you don't react, when you don't back down, when you don't quit. And it's going to limit the amount of accusations that they have, and it's going to limit the amount of options that they have. Like I said, when you live above reproach, when you're not out drinking or doing other things, even though there's disinformation campaign against the targeted individual, anytime you screw up, it just magnifies all that stuff. But if you don't react, you don't play into it, other people are eventually going to see it, especially if you don't react in a way where they have to become aggressive and cross that line, that boundary. Maybe they'll get caught. Maybe it'll be obvious. It certainly isn't going to gaslight you, and that's important in the end. So creating boundaries around yourself, having as much environmental authority as you possibly can, sticking to what's going on, focusing on the task, keeping yourself busy. And, at the end of the day, that's really all you have to do is put one foot in front of the other. and they're the ones that look like idiots instead of you. But I understand it's difficult, and you're only human. But that would be my advice as far as that. And we'll go back into the comments. Okay, all right. Well, it looks like Jeremy M. Welcome to the live stream. And I wear headphones all day at work, listening to music, audiobooks. That's a great strategy. That's excellent. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's total environmental authority, because they will use the ear gate. They will be within earshot of the target, and they will use the directed conversations. They will use the comments. They will use the snide little remarks. They will use the sarcasm. They will laugh and snicker and cough and do all these little whistle and everything. But if you don't hear it, it's not going to affect you. If you don't look for it, if you don't see it, if you're not looking around, letting it come into the eye gate, they're whispering or doing all these little things, or the sign language or whatever they're using, rolling their eyes or, laughing. Well, it's not going to bother you, right? And at the end of the day, I've done it. I've experimented with that kind of thing before, because I've had days where, especially when I was a new target individual, I was looking around for this stuff. I wonder if it's going to happen, and you don't know. Really how to quantify this experience of gangstalking that you're in, and you get a job somewhere else or whatever, and of course it's going to start, but you're looking for it, and then, oh no, it's going to happen again. You start anticipating the worst. You start getting frustrated because you're trying to solve something. It's like a puzzle that just keeps, somebody's knocking it over, somebody's smashing the sandcastle. It adds to the frustration that you're dealing with. You become emotional, but if you don't pay attention to it, it's like, you have to look at it as a game or an opportunity, to cancel out this stuff, because you're going to be playing this game either way, right? You're going to be playing the target individual game, whether you like it or not. You might as well be the damn winner. You might as well be the one with the authority, even though you're the one being persecuted. The odds are against you, okay? Which is, for a lot of people, exciting. It's like when you see those Navy SEALs and those guys. I can't remember what TV show that was, but they would do that. They would get a Navy SEAL guy, and they would say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw you in freezing water. We're going to bake you in a sauna. We're going to keep you up for 3 days, and we're going to throw you on the simulated battlefield. And this dude's like, cool, and he goes out there, and he's gone through all these harsh scenarios. They covertly drug him. They do all these things, and he runs out there with a paintball gun and just destroys the thing. And everybody's like, wow, how'd you do that? Because, that it's a challenge. It's an opportunity. And, the odds are against you as a targeted individual. That's why they call it gangstalking. And you have that rare opportunity. Use it. Okay, let's see what's out there. Oh, Mr. Beach Walker, welcome to the live stream. What is the end goal of Satan and those who serve him? Does Satan think that he can win the battle against God, or is it just to drag on as many people down with him as he can? Well, I'm going to give him enough credit to believe that I don't think that's possible, okay, for a lot of different reasons. And I don't think that Satan believes that he can beat God at all, okay. Unfortunately, for them, and and I don't take joy or pleasure in the condemnation of any being, okay. I look forward to justice and perfect righteousness brought in by Jesus Christ, absolutely. And part of that is going to be, locking up, the demons and so on and so forth, the unclean spirits and the rebellious angels and stuff like that during the millennium. And then there's going to be the lake of fire after that. And I don't take joy in any of those things. But as far as that question is concerned, I don't think that they believe that. Okay, and when you look at this whole scenario that we're dealing with, it becomes very evident. One of the first things that you're going to notice, especially concerning Bible prophecy, is God, he just comes out and says, okay, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. People are going to be this way. They're going to, end up, being homosexuals, and, they're going to be, heartless. And, during the end, it's going to move in this direction. There's a whole list of what happens to people. It's not just homosexuality. There's a lot of things that are going to happen. It involves sorcery. It involves all the stuff we're looking at in the secret societies. It involves greed. It involves, sexual perversion and all that stuff. Okay, the cognitive dissonance that we're looking at, and so on and so forth. But the obvious example that we're looking at when you see, for example, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So they dealt treacherously with people. They moved into that area where they were infiltrated, and then right before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a lot of homosexuality and those obvious signs. Okay, that usually happens, and well, that's not by mistake. And I believe, and I'm being hypothetical, that there are different legal scenarios that give these spirits, legal rights to people. Okay, and they have a modus operandi, and I think it's like their job to basically test people and prepare them for the wrath of God and the condemnation. Okay, and there's a lot of things involved. In other words, what I'm getting at is this. Okay, if you're the devil, you say, well, I got to beat God. What's the first thing that pops out there when you get into Bible prophecy? Why don't you just stop that from happening? Right? You're the God of this world. You got control of all these, demons and principalities and unclean spirits and all that stuff. Why don't you just quit making people homosexuals? Why don't we just end this whole sodomy thing and make some type of star children cult where everybody's doing all this righteous stuff, but they're denying Jesus? And then you'll be able to put the Christians to shame, and it'll completely, shut off Bible prophecy altogether. Oh, wow, you could do that, couldn't you? Well, no, you can't do that. And I'm speculating, but the reason is because they have certain criteria to fulfill to get their needs, to feed on people. And I've talked about that as far as targeted individuals, is that, a lot of this stuff is feeding on people. Okay. There's a lot of that going on. They are devouring. That's referenced several times. Satan is seeking whom he may devour, so on and so forth. Who knows exactly where they're, what they're getting out of these things. But as far as the unclean spirits, we know that when they get cast out of a person, they can find no rest. They go into waterless places. And it's important to realize that when a demon is being cast out of someone, they resist. They don't like that. Okay. It is very uncomfortable before them, and they're like the foot soldiers, and that comes out of the Genesis 6 account, where you have the half-breeds, the amalgamation of the angelic realm and the human realm, and the only ones that are in the abyss, or the abyss or Tartarus right now, or speculatively, depending on what kind of material you're going to get your information out of, are the 200 Watchers, or the ones that rebelled and did all that stuff along with Azazel, and they're bound up there, and so on and so forth. Like when Jesus ran into the unclean spirits, right? When he went out of the territory of the Hebrews, he got met by the demoniac, and they said, we know who you are. You're the Son of God. Don't throw us into the abyss. They knew about Psalm 82. They knew that Christ was going to inherit the nations, right? They probably heard about, the 72 that represented the table of nations that he sent out into, the Gentile territory to cast out spirits and demons and stuff like that. And you guys know that story. It's in Luke, right? Jesus said, you're going to go out there, you can have authority, to trample on scorpions and snakes and the power of the enemy. And these guys, they ended up leaving Jesus after, he told them, you got to eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. And that was after he told them that he saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. But they didn't really want anything to do with Jesus. They didn't understand. It's like he sent them out there, gave them power over the enemy. They came back. They didn't even want to know who he was. They were completely blind. It probably irritated him. I'm being speculative. And then he said that, and they took off, right? They left. They walked away, and the only ones that were left were the 12 apostles. Okay. But getting into this whole thing with unclean spirits and so on and so forth, their motivation, and the kingdom of Satan is very organized, is to do what? Well, it's to devour. Okay. It's to have, his kingdom working in a way that, that makes sense, that these beings that are underneath him have what they need and what they want. And there's probably a lot of motivation for this whole thing. So I don't believe that they think they can win, right? And their battle is not, they're not trying to I don't know, take away God's throne or whatever. It's to take you to hell. It's like what Mr. Beachwalker, emphasized. They just want to take as many people with them for whatever reason, whatever they get out of that. And there's obviously something they are getting out of that. Okay. When you get into Revelations or other places where it talks about people who overcome are going to rule and reign with Jesus. And then in Psalm 82, the principalities and powers were judged, and their immortality was revoked. So there's people out there like Dr. Michael Heiser who will say that that, people who overcome through Jesus are literally going to be ruling and reigning with him, and they're going to take the place of some of those spirits who fell. And so there could be, some enmity involved in that kind of scenario too. But to devour, to steal and destroy, right? I don't believe for a minute that they think that they can beat God. Now they're basically, hunter killers, right? They were, angels, stuff like that before, or higher beings that ruled and reigned, and now they're forced to, hunt, I don't know, chickens on old McDonald's farm, and to steal and destroy. So that's a complete flip for those guys. That's my best guess on that one. On average, Joe, welcome to the live stream. Okay. Mats and Miles, welcome to the live stream. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, Mr. Beachwalker says, I think some of the strange and unusual things going on today is Satan increased activity. I think you're right. I don't think anybody could deny that. It's exponential. Absolutely. As the cognitive dissonance that we are witnessing in the world around us is frightening. Okay. The hostility towards God, the move into sexual perversion and immorality. And I talked about that in Demonic Hive 1 and 2. When you get into the, even just the philosophical infiltration and the cultural infiltration into the world through that type of Marxist or Fabian socialism theology, right? But ultimately it's demonic, right? And like I said earlier, that, that is part of the legal leeway, right? You start to infiltrate, just like the mind of a targeted individual is infiltrated. And I've talked about the fact they're not asking permission. Okay, they're traumatizing you. They are subjecting you to different things, circumstantial stimuli. They are sensitizing you. They are conditioning you, and they're just basically coming into your life. They're barging in. They're setting up shop. They're setting up an infrastructure in your mind, and ultimately they want you to be infected with their disease that they are trying to give you, and you become your own handler. They want to infiltrate, infect. It's like getting a virus. But it's the same way with the demonic realm. Okay, they come in, they go after the leaders. The leaders start controlling people. You get into the culture, you get into Hollywood, you get into the philosophy, you get into the churches, you corrupt the doctrine, and then of course now you got your foot in the door, man. And they just come in, and then they just change everything around. They flip, the whole system upside down. Black becomes white, dogs and cats living together. It's a nightmare, right? And then they have more legal leeway, and it just has reciprocity to the point where people don't know what gender they are, and you have all that weird stuff going on. I'm not going to go into that. You guys know that. And even when you get into the supernatural stuff, there's a lot of weird things going on. We have a whistleblower who's talking about extraterrestrials and dimensional phenomena and all those things. And I believe that stuff is demonic. I believe it's dimensional. I don't believe there's little green men from the star system of Orion or Andromeda or whatever. I believe that stuff is dimensional. I believe that stuff is basically the principalities and powers, the prince of the power of the air. Okay, that's demonic. Okay, and I believe that that's one of the strong delusions that is coming out to destroy people. Like I said earlier, you have the criteria, you have faith and truth. Okay, the whole idea of sending your children to public school nowadays, in my opinion, this is my opinion, is a really bad idea. They're going to learn we came from apes, that we came from a pond that got hit by lightning, and you just throw billions of years into it, and now it's a miracle, and we're all running around here, and we've got lions, tigers, zebras, and all that stuff, and it's a miracle, and we're going to go to the moon and grow tomatoes, and we're going to fly to Mars, and we're going to have robots, and it's going to be like a sci-fi movie or something, and that's not what's going to happen. Okay. And that's not good science. We have to look at catastrophic interpretation of the data. We have to look at prophecy. We have to look at the timeline, and we have to realize that there is a judgment day, and that there is a day of reckoning, and that we are going to bow the knee before Jesus Christ, and that we need to fear God and we need to try and please Him and submit to the Christ. Okay. You go to public school, you learn the exact opposite. People are becoming godless. They're becoming perverted. They're getting involved in all kinds of things. They're ruining their life. They're becoming dumber. All the technology that we have is just making things more convenient, and the government is taking more control. We're moving into that type of turnkey totalitarianistic society. And a lot of targets will talk about the stuff that there's experiments, that they're dealing with the directed energy weapons and the V2K and all that stuff. And it's all part of it, along with the indoctrination of generations of kids to now people don't even know what the hell gender they are. You don't think that's part of it? You're blind. Of course, it's part of it. The fluoridation, the chemical DNA methylation, the spiritual hostility towards God, the moral decline. All these things play into it. Absolutely, Mr. Beachwalker, I would agree. A gang stalked free guy with an eagle eye. Welcome to the live stream. I would I would respectfully disagree with you on the flat earth. In fact, I think I've got videos about that in the playlist. If I don't, I'll put that in there. But anyway, that's not a big deal. There's a lot of people that do believe that. I am not one of them. Okay. Okay. Go Productive 1187 says, I mean, you just have to accept that you're alone in this situation to begin with. That's, acceptance is a big part of being a targeted individual. And I've talked about that before, that there are things that you're just going to have to deal with and try to make the best of it and be productive. There is going to be a lot of isolation concerning targeted individuals, and you want to use your time productively, and you want to use it wise, in the sense that you can educate yourself. You can look into the sermons that are out there online. You can study things that have to do with off-grid living or homesteading or whatever interests you, and you want to educate yourself and broaden your horizons rather than sitting around and using that default program that your mind has and marinating on things that you don't have control over, because they want that. They want stagnancy. They want you, in that place where you're not, growing. You're going in reverse. You're becoming dysfunctional. You're having a hard time concentrating. You feel futile. You feel out of control. You feel hopeless, and then they can provoke you emotionally. But that's not what you have to do. You can move into the proper place. You can create a framework and structure and develop protocols around yourself where you can actually thrive and improve yourself in spite of the fact that you're being isolated and dealing with this type of tyranny. And gang stalking is actually an opportunity at that point, even though it seems unpleasant. And there are a lot of people that are walking around and moving through the landscape of the world that have it easy. They don't have any distractions. They're not dealing with gang stalking. They're not dealing with things unpleasant, but they're becoming blind. They are becoming stupid. Okay, they're moving into a place where they're not growing. They're going in the opposite. It's de-evolution. Okay, rather than growing, they're going in the opposite direction. And that's one of the things that you can be thankful for as far as the gang stalking. Yeah, you're going to deal with isolation. Okay, you're going to deal with harassment. People are going to judge you, and they're eventually going to find out what you're dealing with. Okay, that's something you need to know. Keep that in the forefront of your mind. It's like when people disagree with you, and you're right about something. Eventually, they're going to have to change their mind. It's going to be evident. It's going to be undeniable. It is a fundamental reality that people are going to be judged. And like I said, your hope is not in a lawsuit, even though that'd be great. Okay, I'd love it. I'd love, one of you guys to get a hold of me and say, I caught one of the gang stalkers, and, it'd be in the news, and that'd be awesome. But ultimately, this stuff is going to come to light. And it's not that you have to be happy or excited about the torture and the unpleasant circumstances that these people are going to experience that are involved in this stuff, but it's true. They're laughing now. They're going to cry later. They think they're winning. They're actually losing. All the seeds that they're planting when they're harassing you and doing all these things are going to come, and they're going to bear fruit, and it's going to be a real nasty harvest. Fundamental reality. It's coming. Okay. Nicholas Bosserman says, I've heard many military personnel are absolutely they are. They started experimenting on people from the military a long time ago, and that even when you get into the covert agenda of psychiatry, they were like the forefront of some of the experiments, concerning that stuff, and that's really where a lot of the infiltration began that we are looking at now. And I've talked about that with targeted individuals that they fit the criteria of psychiatry suspiciously well. Okay, they have developed that, according to that type of DSM or diagnostic criteria for the persecutory delusion and all those other things that targets are accused of, schizophrenia or whatever, or factitious disorder, delusions of grandeur, and so on and so forth. But that's where it started. And a lot of people that get into MK Ultra will reference Frank Olson, right? His family actually got compensated for what happened to him, but he was approached because he worked in aerosol. I guess I'm trying to think of the area now, but aerosolization of different chemicals and biologic warfare and chemical warfare and stuff like that. And they wanted to have him test and experiment on soldiers, right? And he saw some of that stuff happen, and that's when he became a target. They wanted to find out exactly how much sarin gas or something like that it would take to kill people. So you were using our own troops. They were putting little dabs on their wrist, and he saw one of the people just die very violently. And he said, I'll have no part of this. He protested. And then, of course, they invited him up for a little get together, and they dosed him with some really nasty LSD and eventually, baited him into a CIA kill methodology where they pushed him out a window. But yeah, they experiment on military personnel. Absolutely. I'll admit that I have not trusted the military my entire life. And I looked into things that happened in Vietnam when I was just a kid, and I figured out something was suspicious concerning the military. And it's no offense to people who are out there, because if you're in the military, I'm not criticizing you. You are the backbone and a real patriot. It's the people who are corrupt behind the scenes in the secret societies and in the hierarchy of the deep state and all that stuff, the New World Order or whatever, that make it corrupt. The soldiers and the people in the military, good people. Okay, they're the real patriots. Unfortunately, they are taken advantage of, especially when we went over to the Middle East and we left all that stuff behind. I'm not going to mention it specifically. I know people personally that they lost their faith in the chain of command right there and then. And they stopped going to their military get-togethers and all that stuff because it was just too demoralizing for them. They saw people give their lives. They saw people die, lose limbs and everything, and then they and they did that in Vietnam too. They would use all their resources to take a geographical location, and then the government would just have them do it again and do it again and do it again, and they just watch all their brothers in the military, all their companions die and get mutilated, and they'd have to. It just, some of those people just freaked out, but yeah, they do. They experiment on people in the military quite frequently. All righty. Okay. All right. Angels Don't Fall. Welcome to the live stream. It looks like Angels Don't Fall is in severe pain, and that's unfortunate. We'll just put a prayer out there for all the targeted individuals who are suffering, not only from pain, but from depression and hopelessness and despair, Lord. We just ask you, by the power of the Holy Spirit, that they would comfort Angels Don't Fall and all targeted individuals out there who are experiencing unpleasant circumstances, and that they would have peace, that they would have hope, they would sleep soundly tonight, and they would feel energized, and that they would have joy, and that these people who are doing these things would not only feel ashamed, but they would be brought to light, and that they would be dealt with the system of justice that is set up in the world, or however you say fit, Lord. However, not our will, but yours be done. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, let's see what's going on out there. All right, guys. Well, we've gotten together. We talked about the puppet masters. We've talked about the destabilization of targets and how that's crucial to do to people, because they have to obfuscate this activity. They have to discredit the targeted individual. They have to get them into that place of plausible deniability, to use the sensitization tactics, to use all these methods. And I usually go through that real quick. And I haven't done that in a while, about sensitization and that hypervigilance that is used to create that paranoid medium that targets deal with. If you're a new targeted individual, they are using that plausible deniability. They are using environmental tyranny to get you into a place where you're going to start reading into this stuff. Okay, it's not that you're not being stalked. It's not that the things that you're dealing with are not real. Okay, it is that they are invading your mind and they are setting you up. They are throwing you into a mechanism that was always there. So if you're a new targeted individual and you're wondering how all these things could be happening to you, whether you're on a Truman Show or an alternate reality, or you died, went to hell or something, that's not funny, because I've thought of that stuff myself. It is a mechanism, okay, and it's been there for a long time. And you're being sensitized to that mechanism. And there's going to be themes involving covert poisoning, paranoia, break-ins, slander campaigns, workplace harassment, directed energy weapons, street theater, directed conversations. All these things are going to be involved. And there's going to be words and phrases and things that are out there in the environment, like people who haven't changed their headlight. And then they will attack people with a one headlighted vehicle. And then when targets see somebody driving around, who screws up in traffic, who's got, one headlight, automatically they're a gang stalker. Or if they're driving a particular color of vehicle, okay, that's not enough criteria to assume someone is a gang stalker. And what happens? People look crazy, or they move into a place where they're starting to wonder if they're crazy. Right? It discredits the targeted individual community. It discredits the targeted individual, and they will move them into that place of hypervigilance. For the people around you, it is going to seem unwarranted that you're being paranoid. You're displaying the sequelae of mental illness, or an anxiety disorder, or a panic disorder, or schizophrenia, or propositional tyranny, or whatever. Okay, but really, you were dealing with things that other people have not been sensitized to, and you notice it, okay? And there's words, phrases, and I've talked about how people can be attacked in mass, like the Mandela effect. A lot of people think that's just BS. It's not. Okay, they did that stuff on purpose. Well, they did those things purposefully to get people to question reality. Okay, they did it purposefully, and there were people who knew about it. Okay, absolutely. And it was done purposefully, and it's a good example of the things that targeted individuals deal with. And I've talked about how when you get into the media and the news outlets and all that stuff, when you get into the hierarchy that we talked about earlier concerning the perps, when you move in from the government to the occult, and you get into the people who have all that money and control everything, and the spiritual dimension, all that stuff, it's all interconnected. And that stuff will be used even in news reports or radio or whatever, all that stuff out there, billboards, just the way that people talk and communicate with each other. And to the average person, they're not going to notice that stuff. But if you've been sensitized to it as a targeted individual, of course, that's the first thing you're going to see, and it's everywhere. You turn on the talk show, you turn on the radio, you go outside, you go to the grocery store, you go to a movie, whatever, it's there. And people are being attacked in mass. They're thrown into this menagerie of sensitization and conditioning. Okay. And it's scary. A lot of the stuff that's coming at targets is designed that way, but then there's things that are specially tailored just for you. Okay. And that happens. And I've talked about, symbolism, I've talked about different hand gestures, hand signals, colors, words, phrases, unorthodox behaviors, different things that come into play, themes, and it's there. Okay, and it seems like the target is in that Truman Show. It's I call it the Truman effect. Okay, and then you move into things like the crescendo effect, where you move into that place where targets are provoked. The reciprocity that is created and the emotional manipulation that goes along with all these techniques move the target into a place where they get emotional, and they start succumbing to the environment. And I've talked about the circumstantial stimuli in this video, where you have it's like a computer language, right? The positive is the 0, the 1 is the negative, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, and you move into that place and you start to question your faith. You start to question your sanity, the perception of the world around you, and they will use that technique of sensitization involved in your circumstances and your environment to get you into that place where you can be gaslighted, okay, and you believe different lies. And I've talked about the criteria for condemnation concerning the kingdom of darkness of faith and truth, and that's a good example, because what happens? People will start believing things that aren't true, right? Or people will start believing, things about God or about themselves, right? That are just nothing more than the effects of the environmental tyranny moving someone into propositional tyranny. Okay. So if you're out there and you're wondering what's going on, it's a type of invasion. It's a space invasion. It's an invasion into your mind. It's tyranny. It's murder. It's brainwashing. And they love that stuff. And there's a lot of reasons why targets are attacked. And I talked about that you're dealing with things involving, experimentation. You're dealing with things involving the scapegoat stuff, or the secret society, or the occult thing, where you have people that are just, using menticide and feeding on people and destroying them more, morally and mentally. And it's like a covert form of murder. And you have, those things that I talked about, the death squads and the counterterrorism. It's, the CIA, MK Ultra, COINTELPRO, organized stalking, cognitive warfare, multi-domain warfare. You have the crisis actors. You have military and civilian gangstalkers and hit squads. You got the stuff that involves the Stasi techniques. You've got all kinds of experimentation. You got the NSA, the FBI, the DHS, the DOD, NATO. You have the occult. You have the secret societies. You have all these things, and it's really it's an eye opener when you look into it, and it will seem overwhelming at first, but you have to notice, depending on who you are, how these people are doing this, and you have to have a good logistical explanation for how this stuff works, or otherwise you're eventually going to start questioning your sanity, because it goes on and on and on. And I've talked about the fact that these strategies can flip, and they'll turn it on, they'll turn it off, and they will use incremental stimuli and environmental tyranny, and they will move you into a place where you become dysfunctional. They will try to accuse you, and they will try to get you to believe that you deserve it, and get you to internalize these things and see yourself in light of the harassment. Never forget how you got the way you are. Okay, you never want to forget that. You're paranoid because you're being attacked. Okay, you're becoming dysfunctional because the building blocks of your life are being taken and destroyed. And you have to try to hold on to what you have, keep putting one foot in front of the other, maximize the opportunity that you have to see the reality around you, to improve your mind, to educate yourself, and to neutralize what these people are doing. Okay, it's important to know those things. I'd like to thank everybody who's participated in the live stream. I'd like to thank everyone who helps support me and the channel. Angels don't fall. Hopefully your pain will get better. And anybody else who's listening, hang in there. Ask God for help. He's always faithful and true. God bless. Guys, be good to yourselves. Be safe.